What's up, Internet? My name is Ryan Holmberg, and today I'm going to show you how to set up a knob that also sends out a trigger or gate while you're turning it. This can be helpful in a couple different ways. I'm gonna go over a couple different ways you can use this and route this for various uses if you're trying to perform electronic music with the Zoia. When I try to perform, I like to keep my hands busy as much as possible because it makes it more fun for me and hopefully also more interesting for whoever's watching. And sometimes my songs have a lot of changes that happen all in a specific moment, and I don't have enough hands to do all those changes manually. I guess more specifically, like I do a lot of live looping, and sometimes I worry that if I can't get the loop perfect the first try and my drum machine is automated to change sequences no matter what, then the beat could end up moving on without me while I'm still trying to get the loop right. And so I like to change the sequences manually sometimes for that reason. And sometimes for transitions, if I'm playing keys with one hand and turning a knob, and I also need to send a program change during this transition, I won't have enough hands for it all the time, so it can be helpful to have a knob that does some of that work for you while you turn it. And it could be a program change, and you could also use it to control mutes or soloing parts or whatever you might need it for. So basically, I'm using the Digitact for my knob. I'm sending the MIDI from Digitact into the Zoia with a MIDI CC in module. I've set it up to the correct channel and the same CC number that I'm using. I have a comparator. I have a sample and hold. We'll get into that. I have a trigger and a MIDI PC out message module. So in this case, I'm showing you how to send out a PC message with this. So I'm going to connect the MIDI CC in module to the positive input of the comparator, and then the negative input is going to act like a threshold to tell the output when to turn on, like at what point during the knob turn it's going to turn on. So if you set it all the way at the bottom, the output is going to always be on, because when the positive and negative input are equal, it stays on. So the negative has to be higher at least a little bit for it to be off at all. So if you put it right towards the bottom but not all the way, then once you start turning the knob, it'll turn on immediately until you turn the knob all the way back down. And this is helpful if you want it to send a PC message like right when you start to turn it. But if you want it to only send out a signal right at the end, like at the top of the value of the knob turn, then you just got to turn the negative value up towards the top. So then, all the way you're turning the knob, nothing happens, and then right when it reaches the top, it'll send out a signal. And so what we're going to do with this is attach it to a trigger, and then the trigger will go into the input of the PC module, PC out module. And you'll need to set that to the right channel, and then you'll need to send the MIDI out from Zoia to the MIDI input of whatever gear you're trying to change the sequence of. And then you'll need to change the PC out number just to make sure it's the right sequence that you're changing to. So yeah, in this situation, we're turning the knob, it goes to the top, it sends a trigger to the PC change, and then you can move on with the performance. But let's say you want to turn this knob, send a PC message, and you want to keep turning this knob, but you don't want it to send another PC message. You only want it to send it once within the song. Then we're going to need the sample and hold for that. So instead of connecting directly to the trigger, I'm going to delete that connection. You're going to go from the output of the comparator to both of the inputs on the sample and hold. And this way, when it receives that trigger, it'll turn on, and no matter how many times it gets triggered again, it'll just stay on. And then from the sample and hold, you go into the trigger, and then the trigger's still going into the PC module. If you don't understand how this sample and hold trick works, I made a video on it earlier. It's tip number 3, sample and hold on-off switch, if you want to understand how that works. So the way to reset this sample and hold, since once it stays on, or once it gets on, it stays on, you need a different source, a different trigger to turn it off. And so normally I would use a push button for that. So I got a push button here, and then you're just going to connect that to only the trigger input of the sample and hold. So right now the knob is all the way up and all the values are up here. So if I press it, it's not going to receive another trigger because it's already at one value. So I'm going to have to turn down the knob a little bit in order to get it to receive that trigger again. And then it turns off. And that you'd press that either at the beginning of the song, or if you're just practicing some run-throughs and you've already sent that PC message, then you just press it in between takes, and then you can get that started again. All right, so now that we've covered the PC message part, let's move on to controlling mutes with a knob turn. So you won't need the PC module. You won't need the trigger module. You may still want the sample and hold depending on how you want to control this mute. So I'll leave that there for now, but I'm not going to connect it to anything. So what you'll need is a CC out module. You'll need to set it to the correct channel and then find out what piece or what CC number your drum machine or whatever piece of gear needs to receive to control the mutes of whatever you're trying to mute. I'm not going to connect it to anything. I'm just going to use the module for example purposes. So the Digitact, for example, I've noticed that when the value of the CC module is at 0, then the track won't be muted. It needs to be all the way up for it to be muted. And then when you let it go, it doesn't toggle, it's a momentary mute. So you could just, if that's how you're trying to do it, if you want to mute a certain part with the comparator, then you could just connect it straight to the CC module and just say, if you want it to only mute while the knob is in the top position, you can have the negative threshold set towards the top, and then it will stop muting once you turn the knob back down. Or if you want it to mute, or if you want it to only mute once you start turning the knob, you can turn the negative input down, and then at the bottom it's not muted, and once you start turning it, it stays muted until you turn the knob all the way back down again. And yeah, kind of depends on what you're trying to do there, but that's what I've noticed with the Digitact, and I think a lot of other pieces of gear would probably work like that as well. I think those are the main two things that I would use this for. But depending on what you're trying to do, there may be other reasons why you may want to use a setup like this. Or I guess we could get into the sample and hold for this too. So if you want to turn the knob and have it mute and then stay muted, you could keep the comparator attached to both inputs of the sample and hold, and then you could send the sample and hold output to the CC out module, the muting CC, and then it'll stay muted once it receives that trigger, and then it'll unmute once you hit the push button that is connected to the trigger input to reset the sample and hold. So turn the knob, it mutes, turn the knob back down, press the button, it unmutes. And yeah, I think that's all I'm going to cover for this technique, but I hope you found this to be helpful, and thanks for watching.